All right, good afternoon. Now I can actually say with some accuracy, good afternoon. So today we're going to be looking at two small chapters. They're fairly potent, but they're two chapters 2 and 3. I have two reasons for doing this. One, they're small. And chapter 8 is large. So we're we're making room for chapter 8. It's going to take more than one session for chapter 8. But chapter 1, as you may recall, set up the principle of an anatomy of the nefesh. Now, of course, the nefesh, anytime I say the word nefesh, I go for my throat because I want to remind you that it's all of your being. It's your being. It's everything that makes you alive. It's animus, and there is it represents the living, your living self. That's why so often translated as soul, or how soul's understood. But I tried not to use the word soul because it brings with so much other baggage. But nefesh was broken down to parts, into activities in chapter 1. Is highly influenced, of course, by the Greeks, by Aristotle. It's also in Maimonides is in conversation with Islamic philosophers, especially Abyssinia or Ibn Rushd. And he lays this out in chapter 1 so we can get to chapters 2 and 3, because that's the point. Chapter 2 concerning the transgressions of the abilities of the nefesh, or the errors of the nefesh, the designation of those abilities that are the seat of the virtues and vices. As soon as you get to virtues and vices, we're in Aristotelian territory, but not completely, not completely. This is, of course, his preface to his commentary on Pirkei Avot. So it is worthwhile, if not really important, to take a look at least where in Pirkei Avot he's referring to. And even though I did send it out and I said I will not be sharing my screen a lot, I am going to do that right now. All right, you should be able to see on your screen Pirkei Avot chapter 4. And good. So we're going to read it out. This is Pirkei Avot chapter 4. And this has, and again, Pirkei Avot is a text you all should be reading all the time, especially if you have not yet read Pirkei Avot, it's the saying of the ancestors. There is a very strong tradition of reading it between Passover and Shavuot. So there's a Passover warning for you. Once you've cleaned once you've cleaned out the chametz and loaded up with the matzah, find a copy of Pirkei Avot, and from the second day of Passover until Shavuot, read Pirkei Avot. It's good for you. It's meant to be good for you. It's from the Mishnah. It's not found in the Babylonian Talmud. The Talmud did not need to comment on it, but it's in the Mishnah. It's also in many prayer books. And this is Pirkei Avot, chapter 4. Ben Zoma. We like to note that this is not Rabbi Ben Zoma, but Ben Zoma, a teacher of the Tana of the first period of the rabbinic period, who does not have the title rabbi, but appears a lot teaching about ethics. Who is wise? One who learns from everyone, as is written, Psalm 119:9, I have gained understanding from all my teachers, which means more than just one person, obviously, but then goes on, who is mighty? One who subdues the passions, as is written, Proverbs 16:32. One who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and one whose temper is controlled than one who captures a city. Who is rich? the one who rejoices in their portion. As is written, Psalm 128:2, you shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be happy, and it shall go well with you. You shall be refers to this world. It shall be well with you refers to the world to come. Olam haba. Who is honored? One that honors humanity. As is written, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me be treated with contempt. So Ben Zoma is bringing to us his 4 questions. It's kind of appropriate before Passover. Who is wise, who is mighty, who is rich, who is honored? If you note that Ben Zoma, writing in Pirkei Avot, probably not knowing there will be a book called Pirkei Avot, he is going for 3 out of the 4 to Psalms and Proverbs, which is the wisdom literature. Amongst the wisdom literature, different than the biblical literature, although it's in the Holy Scriptures, in the Ketuvim, the writings. But this is the bedrock or the ground floor of which, on top of which Maimonides is expanding. He's taking these aphorisms: who is wise, who is mighty, who is rich, who is honored, one who learns from everyone, one who subdues the passions, one who rejoices in their portion, one who honors humanity, and placing those characteristics actually inside the nefesh. How's that? Does anyone have any questions or brief comments on that observation? Okay. All right. Okay, so that was a little bit of Pirkei Avot to get us kind of ready for chapter 2. So I sent you chapter 2 early in the week, and I'm glad I did, with a kind of review of, kind of a preview of it. Didn't send you chapter 3, but you'll see why in a second. Well, actually, there's no reason why. I just didn't. So in any case, we'll see chapter 3. But chapter 2 is all of 2 pages. I'm going to trust now that you got a chance to look at it, but we can actually look at it in detail, because it talks about the sensitive and the appetitive, that these 2 abilities alone are to be ascribed as all transgressions and observances. The abilities of the nutritive and the imaginative, these are all parts described in chapter 1, do not give rise to observance or transgression. For in connection with neither is there any conscious or voluntary act. So that's where he's going for. He's going for the things that we do consciously. He acknowledges there are things we don't do, there are things we do unconsciously. One cannot consciously suspend their functions or curtail any of their activities. And that, if you remember, these are things like smell, touch, hearing, right? It's very fun for me right now that I have a newborn granddaughter, and I'm watching her respond to the world that she's in. By the way, she likes the Beatles. All babies like the Beatles. It's an amazing thing. Trying to raise her on Dexter Gordon, it's not going well. Monk was not good, but Beatles, very good. So she's responding to things in her environment because she can't not respond to them, right? She's just now beginning to respond to the sound of her mother's voice, which is always distressing to the grandparents because she likes it much better. So she's in a world of appetite. Oh, yes, appetite. We know that one really well, especially when everything she gave comes back to share. So there's a whole lot of things going on, both in an involuntary way. I don't think these observations I'm making has not been seen by anyone else, right? We're all good on this? Okay, fine. So one cannot consciously suspend those functions. That's the the appetive and the sensitive. However, there are parts which are voluntary. The proof of this is the functions of both these abilities, nutritive and imaginative, continue to be operative even when one's asleep, right? Those are things that go on, nutritive, imaginative, while we're eating and dreaming, basically dreaming. That's also not true of the other nefesh abilities. Consequently, I'm skipping a little. As I said, those abilities really produce transgressions and observances. Now he gets into detail, and that's on the second page. That's on page 9. And this is now pay dirt for Maimonides. Chochma and Seichel. That's on page 9. Chochma and Seichel. Wisdom, which is the knowledge of the direct and indirect causes of things based on previous realization of the existence of those things and the causes which have been investigated. Okay, now we're deep into Greek thought. Reason, consisting of inborn theoretical reason, that is axiom, positing how things might be. Wisdom and intellectual cleverness, which is the ability to perceive quickly and grasp an idea without delay or in a very short time. The vices of this ability are the antithesis or the opposite of these virtues. Moral virtues belong only to the appetive ability, to which that of sensation in this connection is merely subservient. And now he comes to Pirkei Avot, which we just read. The virtues of this ability are numerous, being moderation, in other words, the fear of sin, liberality, honesty, meekness, humility, contentedness, which the Rabbi call wealth when they say, Pirkei Avot 4:1, who is rich? One who rejoices in their lot. As it is said, you will work, you will enjoy the fruit of your labors, you'll be happy and you shall prosper. He doesn't give credit, but we should mention that's Ben Zoma. Also courage, faithfulness, and other virtues are akin to these. Defects of this ability consist of a deficiency or exaggeration of these qualities. And that's a clue to what's going to happen later on. He's going to discuss deficiencies and exaggerations a lot. And it's a key move because he's not content just to say there's a median line. He's going to show that sometimes we veer to a deficiency in a characteristic, and sometimes we go to an exaggeration of a characteristic. There's such a thing as being overly brave or overly courageous. In other words, foolhardiness. And there's such a thing as being overly meek, overly cautious. And sometimes a virtuous person, I'm just forecasting what's coming, a virtuous person has to tilt, to correct imbalance. That's why we are never sure in the mind of Maimonides. I mean, he teaches from his mind, the mind of Maimonides, that what we observe in a person may not be who they are. Ultimately, it might be either an exaggerated or deficient cause, or they are trying to balance themselves. And they look off balance, but maybe they're on a mission of some kind. Maybe they're on a repair. What we perceive is not always what's there. Tanya, you have a hand up.
Yeah. What does he mean by liberality?
I'm sorry?
What does he mean by liberality?
Open-mindedness. Right? The possibility there, here's, if this might be banned in Florida right now, but the possibility that what you know may not be correct.
Alert, audio now on me.
Alyssa,
This overcompensating or teetering between one side or another sounds like an existential response to a situation. And Maimonides was a doctor. Did he ever think about, say, a physical cause or a neurological cause? You know, we talk about the four humors and the temperances, and I just wondered if he had a similar blueprint for the justification of people's behavior. And when you talk about Chachma and Seichel, is that similar to the word Seichel? Oh, he has no Seichel. You know, we use that so derisively now.
yeah, well, to the second question, yes, that's the same. It's a Yiddish version of the same word, so it's perfectly kosher. And to your first question, yes. So in the vast amount of material produced by the Rambam, by Maimonides, yes, medicine is part of it, and the interplay between the living nefesh, right? In other words, your actual breath, your actual body, and the nefesh, which is of the mind. No, it's not of the mind, but it's parallel to the body. There is an interplay between the two. They are connected. One does affect the other. How's that? All right, wonderful. Okay, and Janet.
Hi, Rabbi. Maybe I was influenced by the fact that you, on the first page of the second chapter, page 8, that you increased the font size of the word voluntary.
Yes.
Because it seems like a powerful idea that perception is voluntary. One can make an argument either way, but it seems very core to me of you're making decisions about how you're trying to make decisions be conscious and voluntary about how you perceive the world. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like who is rich? One who rejoices in their lot, right? Maybe my life sucks, but if I can find a way to rejoice in what I have, you know, that kind of, I'm being voluntary. I'm being very mindful. There's a better word of how I perceive the world.
Yes. He reads Pirkei Avot. He doesn't have the word psychology yet. I mean, right there, but more importantly, there aren't departments of psychology. This goes back to Alyssa's her observation / question, which is in his time, right? We're talking about 12th century. Mind and body have not been divided. Actually, in his university, in his studies, medicine and philosophy have not yet been put into different departments. The same way that mind and body have not been separated. Now we're getting back to it now with integrative medicine and all kinds of wonderful moves from various different traditions. But you are correct, and you are correct that, as we'll see this in the next chapter, that in the same way that we can address an illness in the body, we can address an illness in the nefesh, in the mind. Nancy.
Yeah, reading through it, I got the idea that the writer believes that we have control over all of our thoughts and actions. And if we find out that they are incorrect for the wrong reasons, then we can correct them. Is that a truism?
I don't know about your opening move. I don't know about that. Some things like the imaginative and the perceptive are not within our complete control at all. They're not within control. So he's trying to identify those things which are consciously and you're conscious of and then have voluntary responses, and those that don't. But he's not. I don't know if he's being that. The lines are drawn that dark between. Let's see what the Rambam. Let's see what the Rambam moves. Actually, that kind of helps here, because you're really following along nicely in his thinking. This is why I'm saying this text is extraordinarily conversational. It's almost as if there was a test marketing of reading out his thoughts with someone and finding out did they make sense or not, or are they sensible, more likely. So he finishes. I don't think we got to the very end. He finishes his chapter about courage, faithfulness, and defects in this ability consist of deficiency, or exaggeration. As regards the abilities of nutritive and imagination, it cannot be said that they have virtues and vices, or vices and virtues. That's it right there. So those things are involuntary, but that for the nutritive functions work properly or improperly, as for instance, when one says that a man's digestion is good or bad, or a person's digestion is good or bad, or that one's imagination is confused or clear. This does not mean, however, they have virtues or vices. In other words, you can involuntarily, you can mess up your nutrition, but it's not your nutrition's fault. It's not, right? It's not your body's fault that you're loaded up with processed foods and sugary drinks. It doesn't have a desire for these things naturally. He might say, I have no idea what he may say about our modern diet.
But there are other concepts that he refers to that are not as within our control.
Right.
And I wasn't confused. I just didn't necessarily agree.
Okay. Well, good. Good. One, he's not talking right now. He's long gone. All we have is writings. And I'm not, the most perfect vessel for all of this. I'll accept that getting these ideas across and sharing these ideas may be bumpy, and we can have a conversation back and forth. That's the whole point. Alice, you have a hand up.
Yes, I had a question or statement about a previous statement. I think that it's not the way we see the world that's important. It's how we see ourselves in the world. That's the way I'm reading this.
Well, okay. So I appreciate the observation. I'm going to caution against reduction, making things simple. He's building up through these 8 chapters to complexity. He's not right. So before we make things again simple, let's let them be complex. And even if the complexity is imperfect and sometimes maybe contradictory, it's closer to complexity is closer to reality than simplicity. So let's see what happens in wait a second here. Oh, so let's see what happens next. Where did I get?
Well,
like I turned around here for a second. Let's see what happens on page 10. That's where we are. Okay. So this is what he's been driving to, and this is page 10. And he talks about the ancients. And when he talks about the ancients, he's more likely than not talking about Greek philosophers. And they maintain that the nephesh, like the body, is subject to good health and illness. So there it is. Now he's hoping that he has set the table so we can talk about the nephesh like the body in his imaginary way. That the nephesh, like the body, is subject to good health and illness. The science of medicine investigates the health of the body. So he's just laying that out. Now, I'm not reading every single word because one, you have the text, but I'm going to highlight, and I did do a kind of typographical commentary of taking some of the key ideas that I want to convey and making them larger. It's instead of shouting at you, just kind of instead of shouting. So he's looking at this, number 2. Now, just as those who are physically ill imagine, on account of the variated tastes, sweet is bitter and bitter is sweet, and likewise fancy the wholesome to the unwholesome, to be unwholesome, and just as their desire grows stronger and their enjoyment increases from things such as dust, coal, and very acidic and sour foods, and the like, which the healthy loathe and refuse, as they are not only beneficial even to the healthy, but possibly harmful to those whose nephesh is ill. So he's making now its analogy between the body and the things that happen in the body that you can get confused. You can get confused between that which is good for you and not good for you. That is also not necessarily voluntary. That can happen to you through illness. It also can happen to you by conditions that you're in. Those of us who have ever spent any time in a hospital situation and nothing tastes right, or airplane food, because the hum and the altitude alters your taste. I don't know if you are aware of that, but there's been some really good scientific studies showing that actually altitude plus the sound of an airplane is why we all want tomato juice. It somehow tastes really good up in the air. Same thing about hospital food, right? The conditions of medication plus the lights never go out, or it alters how you perceive things. So illness can also make you eat things which are not good for you physically. It can, as a parallel in the nephesh. The wicked one continuously longs for excesses which are really destructive, but which on account of the illness of his nephesh, he considers to be good. So that, to be blunt, is an observation of psychology. Alice, you have your hand back up?
No, I took it down. I thought I took it down.
All right, I can do it for you.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. All right. All right. So he goes further and faster. Just as people unacquainted with the science of medicine realize that they're sick and consult a physician who tells them what they must do, forbidding them to partake of that which they imagine beneficial and prescribing for them things which are unpleasant and bitter, in order their bodies become healthy, that they may again choose the good and spurn the bad. Those whose nephesh becomes ill should consult the sages, the moral physicians, who I guess these days we would call therapists or psychologists, or moral physicians, who advise them against indulging in those evils which they, the morally ill, think are good, so that they may be healed by that art of which I spoke, which I will speak in the next chapter, chapter 4, which are the moral qualities are restored to their normal condition. But one who is morally sick and not aware of the illness imagines that one is well, or being aware of it does not seek a remedy. This person's end will be similar to that of those who, suffering from bodily ailment, yet continuing to indulge himself, neglects to be cured, and here's a big type, in consequence surely meets an untimely death. So he's actually, this is blunt talk, a bold statement that the illnesses of the nephesh, like the body, can actually lead to death. Right. Any thoughts or comments thus far? Janet. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Janet, hang on there. Linda. Linda was up first.
I have two questions. The first is, does Rambam envision that wickedness and virtue can exist along a spectrum and be mutable in their positions on the spectrum? And my second question is, what do you do with the conundrum of a person who is morally sick and unaware of his illness? Because it's a component of moral sickness that you're unaware of it.
Yes.
It's inherent. It's part of, you don't even have to add that as a quality of moral sickness.
Yes, he doesn't, right. He doesn't have a 51-50 option. This is the moral, this is the real, to our very moment. I mean, in our very moment, this is the hardest move. Now here, he's going to deal with a case in chapter 8. In the biblical narrative, and maybe it's not giving away the show because one, I sent it to you, and two, Passover is coming. But Pharaoh is his test case of a mentally deranged person, of a person unable of curing himself, despite, or as a cause of his actions, and his actions being called out to him. So all Moses has as an in-house moral physician to Pharaoh is pleas, conversation, and demonstrations of plagues. And it fails. So that's where the Rambam goes in terms of a scenario. So we'll get there. We will get there. But you're bringing up the terrible dilemma of how does one help someone rebalance themselves if they don't want to, or if they can't perceive it. Yes, this is not. This is why this is not simple. This is complex. If it was simple, the world would be simple, but ain't. All right, who is that? Rebecca, you've got a hand up and you've not asked a question yet.
Thank you very much. Is the concept of the ill nephesh being similar to an ill body, is that new? Is Rambam saying something that hasn't been said before?
No. It's new for us, and it's new. It's not new to Greek thought. It's actually not new to Ibn Rushd and other medieval Islamic philosophers. What's new, one, is that the Rambam is speaking to Jews and to his people. And he's trying to bring these ideas, which he finds evidence for in Pirkei Avot, he finds evidence for in classic rabbinic texts. But he's bringing this kind of systematic teaching because now this is where recording this is always a liability. But who's missing in Rambam's presentation right now?
The rabbis.
God.
Alert, audio now on.
See, I got an alert when I said the word God. It's just the whole system blew up. But there are books written about Rambam's heresy, or the apostasy of the Rambam, or he's simply a medieval. He's gone Greek. This is why I said I mentioned this in the opening talk last week, just last week, that his Mishnah Torah, his code of Jewish law, puts him on the bookshelf. It is indispensable in the survival of the Jewish people. It allowed for it continued the mission of the Mishnah, which was to enable the Jewish people to exist without a sovereign nation, which it empowered the Jewish people to continue as a civilization without sovereignty, right? It kept the Torah in the world. That's the mission of the Mishnah, expanded by the Gemara, but then taken up by Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah. So because he's on the shelf, he cannot be dismissed. But his philosophical works in some corners of the Jewish world are heretical, because he's not claiming that God will cure you. He's not because he doesn't find evidence for that in Pirkei Avot so much. He finds actually behaviors in Pirkei Avot. He finds actual processes in Pirkei Avot, but he's not turning to a kind of theocratic process. Does that make sense? Yes. So the rabbis who incidentally not mentioned, but was really not mentioned, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, that's good. So I'm glad that we recorded that, and then someone will see this one day and burn this video.
From
That'll be
David.
fine. All right, Janet, what's on your mind?
Sorry. I think at the beginning in the first talk last week, you were talking about sort of this Rabbi Hartman trying to get across about the Rambam, his love for the Jewish people, and how that didn't always come across. He was sort of put in this bucket of this very rational philosopher. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but on this page in particular, I'm perceiving a lot of compassion and empathy in this sense of, especially like, you know, on account of the illness of his nefesh, he considers destructive things to be good. There's this lack of judgment, and maybe that's why God isn't here, is because we're not judging, we're actually trying to be practical and help resolve. Do you know what I mean? The wicked one has the power to change their destructive ways, but is not necessarily to be judged for their destructive ways. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into it when I see that. And I sort of had that lens of compassion from your comment from the last class.
Yes,
Thanks.
and you'll see this is the dismay about Pharaoh. Is if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, look, God is ever present in the Exodus narrative, right? Like the star of the show, God. You'll see, and the proof of this, by the way, is the Passover Haggadah. Who's missing the Passover Haggadah?
Moshe.
Right. No mention of Moses. God is the center of the whole story. The other major player of the whole story, Pharaoh. So there's a therapeutic session going on between God and Pharaoh, and it fails. And that's the heartbreak of that failure, which is not always, that's not present in the Haggadah. That's heartbreaking. that if Kadosh Baruch Hu's, if the virtues of chen v'chesed v'rachamim, right, ever listening, ever compassion without end, kindness, right, and then there's wickedness in the world and the heartbreak, the continual heartbreak. This is deep in what'll emerge not just in the Zohar but in Hasidic literature. God's constant heartbreak. I'm constantly trying to show you the way, and you're constantly going off the rails when it comes to the presence of evil in the world. That's why it's not easily solved. It's not easily placated. It has to be addressed as it really happens. So yes, you're seeing that. I think you are seeing that. This is why I quoted my teacher, Rabbi David Hartman, would saying in class like this, with his hands up in the air, saying, you have to understand the compassion of the man. He's speaking about Maimonides, who he spoke about like he was in the first person. But that's, through his teacher, Joseph B. Soloveitchik. That's the line of transmission from Rambam to Joseph B. Soloveitchik to Rabbi David Hartman, and then imperfectly over to you. This feeling that he cares so deeply about humanity because God does. Now we're kind of tapping into Heschel's divine pathos. The prophet wants to do the right thing because that's what God wants is the right thing. That the divine pathos of Maimonides is knowing the pain that humans live in and trying to help discern between that pain, which is psychic and physic, and that pain which can be addressed. It can be addressed. All right. Alyssa.
Alert, audio now on mute.
Was there ever any written record or any attempt by Maimonides to justify what many saw as apostasy and even heresy? He doesn't include God in people's issues.
Yet. I don't know. I can't say if he can justify heresy or apostasy. I do not know. I can't claim that knowledge. Nope, I can't go there. And David.
Yes, thank you. This is perhaps a question from the wicked son. It is that in the text, the Torah text, it is God that hardens Pharaoh's heart. So
Okay,
it's not really.
Hold that. I'm gonna ask you to hold that to when we get there, or closer to when we get there.
Okay.
Because the frightening thing, this is again part of Rambam's heresy, is that in the philosophy of Maimonides, God does not make random choices or idiosyncratic moves.
Okay,
Absorb that for a second.
All right. Just one more sentence.
Yeah.
So Pharaoh lost the agency to correct his mental, moral, and psychological illness. He lost agency.
And going back, because that happens. Look, we've all, either you've encountered personally or simply in this world, individuals for whom their nefesh was so destroyed they could not be saved. Just walk down Ellis Street in San Francisco. And then the effect that has on us, right? That dismay. How does Putin wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night? I don't know. right?
Right,
That's the mystery.
right.
So we'll get, he won't, and then he can't solve it. That's the point, right? The Rambam is not, this is not a book you buy at the airport. This is not a simple text of 8 ways to successful life. He's making observations as he's making diagnostic observations on the activities of the nefesh, like the body, and sometimes the body dies. We've all
Yeah.
lost friends
Yes.
and loved ones, and sometimes the mind dies. So this is not ending up with a cure. Does that make sense?
Yes, but
So-
that's consistent with the notion that God does not intervene, but he has deep pathos for us. But it is inconsistent with the text. It says God did intervene.
hang on,
It was
hang on.
God who
Wait till we
hardened
get
his
there.
heart.
Wait till we get there. He's gonna try to iron out that wrinkle. That's the ultimate wrinkle. Right? So you didn't do the wicked son. All right, Nancy.
This makes a lot of sense to me, especially when you think of the breed between man and God, and the conversation about the things that we do automatically, the things that will happen whether we are automatic about them or not, which is how our nervous system works. There are things that we can do. I mean, we've kind of bought into this idea that we are partners with God in Tikkun Olam, that humans have agency. And I think that this actually attests to the fact that humans have some kind of agency. And it also reflects that he's a physician. And I think last week we mentioned something about that he's seen the upper class suffer from the ailments of excess, and the poor suffer from the not enough. And so I think this puts us in the nefesh, sort of in the middle. And it makes a lot of sense to me, but then it would. I just can't see how anybody would think that this is, excommunicable or catable or anything like
Right.
that.
I'm sorry, I lost your concluding sentence.
I just don't understand how this could be considered so, so out there, such a way out thing. It's so observable. It comes from observation, and it happens whether you put God's name on it or not.
Well, I can't. Here's what I can do. We can observe the reactions of members of authorities in the Jewish communities for whom this is heretical, because in those communities there's a daily conversation with God of prayers and prayers which are answered. And the idea of a God that does not answer prayers is dismaying. Rambam does not say that God does not answer your prayers. But Rambam does say, and this will come to us at the end again, in a way, that you may not like the answer, and it may not be the answer you're expecting, nor may it be an answer that is forthcoming in your lifetime. So that itself can unravel someone's faith. Right. It's not an arguable comment, because if you don't have that worldview, then it doesn't matter. But it does matter, but it doesn't help. You can't argue about something that you don't believe in. So you gotta accept that. Like when Rambam talks about prophecy in his book on prophecy, which he'll refer to, is that the prophets are the people that through arduous effort and rational procedure basically receive like basically tune into God. They become part of sacred attunement, which is different than the prophets were chosen by God. And the idea that God didn't choose Amos or God didn't choose Isaiah means that God doesn't choose Moses. That means that God doesn't choose Abraham. And that just unravels everything. That's part of his heresy. And maybe that's the coldness that some people perceive or misperceive. That if Abraham is the first moral philosopher because Abraham tuned in,
Exactly.
then you don't have a God that reaches from the heavens and pats you on the head.
How many people did God call? Maybe there were a whole bunch of people and only.
Well, to my mind, God is calling every day. It's that we don't answer. Which is parallel to the Koska Rebbe. I mean, it's the same. It's not alone his thinking that God is calling every day and we refuse to pick up the phone. I mean, that's the Rambam, and that's also the Koska Rebbe. Just to throw that in. That's the not alone part. And now I have to ask the question of Chuck. Chuck, I read the chat, and did 2 chapters not come to you?
No, I got your synopsis of them on Sunday afternoon, but the 2 chapters didn't come.
No, that was part of the original packet that went out when you registered.
Never got it.
You never, okay, so you never got the 8
No.
chapters of Maimonides that
No,
looks
I
like,
got the first 2 and the
No.
Pirkei Avot,
no, it looks like
but
this.
not the first 2, the first one and
Looks like this.
yeah, no, never got it.
Okay, so we'll
It's
send
on
it
a-
to you.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. See, that's a
That's easy.
deficiency that can be remedied by a virtue. Quickly. All right. Susie and Bob.
Hello. The presence of God seems to be very implicit in the happening of the plagues. Or
Yes.
did somebody else call for God to do something?
I'm sorry. The presence of God is implicit in the story. Yes, in the plague story, God is extremely present. Yes. And what's the second thing you said?
That's the essence of the statement. And I was under the impression that we were a little surprised that in the Haggadah, God is not playing a live role.
No, God is.
No, God is, it's Moses who's gone. Moses is not an actor in the Haggadah. The hero of the Haggadah is God.
All right.
And remember the Haggadah, not the Passover Seder or Passover eating is biblical. The famous Sistine Chapel, Jesus and disciples, the Last Supper, that's a Passover meal. That's not a Seder. That's a bunch of Jewish guys with their teacher, very common in that time period, eating Passover food. That would be as described in the Torah. The Passover Seder, that we call the Haggadah, is a product of the Mishnah. It is then expanded by the Gemara, and then expanded over time with art and all kinds of stuff. And what the rabbis do in the Haggadah is that they diminish the role of Moses and they raise the role of God, because they are in the traumatic post-Hadrianic repercussion period of the failed revolts. So they don't want to feature a human hero, because that didn't go well. In 70, 132, 138, did not go well. So they make the theos, they make God the center of the Haggadah. You can also look that in Robert Cole's God, a biography, that the journey from Genesis, Exodus, the 5 books of Moses, through the Holy Scriptures, which is not to include the Gospels, by the way. We're talking about the Hebrew Bible. Is that if there is a biography of God, it's that God appears and then disappears into the still small voice in the wilderness, or the still small voice in the whirlwind. And ever present, but not in the same persona as Genesis and Exodus, Numbers and Deuteronomy, or especially Numbers. More than so Maimonides is really has God front and center, but as that last stage of the voice that you can find. In fact, the voice that the whole purpose of this is to find. That's still speaking, but we can't hear because we have stuff stuck in our ears, or we're talking too, we're making too much noise. There's a reason that so many people of maybe our generation, and then in a hyper way, my children's generation are looking for spirituality outside of the synagogue, outside of the prayer book, because there's just too much noise. And it's a very natural consequence to go looking for God in the quiet. But let's finish up on page 11, because you can see where it goes, and yeah, let me do that. Also, let me do one more thing here. I think I can do this. One thing here. All right, Chuck, I just put in the chat, and it might be loading up for a few moments, the syllabus that you never got. That's even a faster response. All right. And Bob, did I answer? Can I take your hand down, or can you put your hand down? Okay, so we're going to finish up here.
Peretz, can I just interrupt for a second? Who's the author of God, a biography that you just mentioned?
Robert Cole, C-O-L-E.
Okay, there's one by Jack Miles. That's a different.
Oh, no. Much better. Jack Miles, sorry. Jack Miles, Claremont Colleges. Sorry, God, a biography, Jack Miles. So we can't fix that tape. That's why I love recording. I just make mistakes left and right. Now they're permanent. Yes, Jack Miles, God, a biography. All right. So we're just out of time, but we can just finish up this. He wants to get us to chapter 4, which is the art of healing disease of the nefesh. That's where we're going to be next week. Those who know, see, that's the thing. Those who know that they are in a diseased state, but nevertheless yield to their inordinate passions, are described in the Torah. I will go in the stubbornness of the heart, in order that the indulgence of the passions may appease the thirst of them. So that's God the healer. For while they may mean to quench their thirst, they actually only make themselves thirstier yet. And then he proves this by going to Solomon in Proverbs. The way of the fool is straight in his own eyes, but he who listens to counsel, or one who listens to counsel, is wise. And he says, this means that one who listens to the counsel of the sage is wise, for the sage teaches one the way that is actually right, and not the way of the ethically ill, erroneously considers to be such. Also, Solomon says, there is many a way which seems even before a person, but its ends are ways unto death. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what they stumble. So it's not that these thoughts are not new, but he's taking them from both the Greek and the rabbinic literature and presenting them systematically. That's what's new, at least. Okay, how about that? Wow, that's a lot of thoughts. I want to give a little shout out to Racheli Beal, who's been holding New Lair House together since old Lair House fell apart. And it was her idea to put this offering on a Friday afternoon or Friday at noon as a pre-Shabbat. Because one of the goals of Shabbat, traditionally speaking, is to cut back on the noise and to listen to oneself. Actually have a moment, a day of you not being you. And for the Rambam, that is part of the healing. That is actually part of self-assessment. Self-knowledge, as someone said, is first. And the healthy person does it on a regular basis. All right. Okay, I'm just going through the chat. Okay. Yes, I do advise you go to a bookstore and get a copy of Pirkei Avot. And if you still need them, I will send them to you. But it's a text I think you all should have. So I don't want to enable you not to buy Pirkei Avot.
All right. Ask one question, not
Yes.
to answer today. In what way is Rambam pre-Freudian?
Only because he was born before Freud.
Alert, audio now unmuted.
That's all I want to say on that.
Did Freud read Maimonides?
What?
Did Freud read Maimonides?
I don't know. I know there's a lot of writing about that, and I don't know. But if you find out, come back and tell us next week. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and
Shabbat
Baruch Atah Adonai Notein HaTorah, and see you
Amen.
next time.
Alert, Rebecca Land. Alt F4.